If my people listen to my sermons and they're like, I think he's okay with mutilating children's bodies in the name of transgenderism. I think he's okay with abortion. I don't really know who we'd vote for. I probably haven't been teaching the Bible very well in this time and in this place.
Is Jesus going to allow me to stay where I'm at in terms of how I think about my life?
There it is.
Where I'm at politically. Also, the tribe that I'm with right now, is he going to allow me to stay with these people, or is there going to be a cost to following him?
Correct.
And might there actually be implications?
All right, guys, welcome back to the Grimké podcast. On my right, I've got President Doug Logan, Chancellor Brian Laughlin right
Glad
across
to be here
from
today,
me,
as always, yes.
and Professor Doug Ponder
Yes.
on my
go.
left.
Glad to be here also.
I know, good to be back in the recording studio.
Absolutely.
Having more productive conversations. Today, hitting a really light topic.
Politics.
Light.
Again?
Exactly.
Isn't the first time we've talked about it, by the way.
It isn't.
Won't be the last, by the way, I don't think. Some folks might be worried about that, but
Will not.
Or they might want it to be.
Yes.
We'll get to that.
That's true, yes. Yeah. But not
Wish
first,
you
not the last.
guys would just talk about the Bible. Well, I love talking about the Bible. Turns out the Bible talks about a lot of things.
That's right, yeah. Whatever you have in mind with that stereotype is very, I feel sorry
One
for
day
that.
you're going to meet a man with that voice, and you're going to say, "This is the man.
Honestly,
Thou art the man."
I'll look in the mirror one time, and then I'm like, he was me the whole time. He was trying to
You
correct me.
don't talk that way.
All right. It could have been earlier days. You never know.
I don't know about that. We can kick it off simply by asking, is Jesus a Republican or a Democrat?
I think it's fair. Fair question.
People do ask that question.
People do ask that.
Right. It's a dumb question, but it is a question people ask.
People in our churches are going to ask that specific of a question.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways you can think about how to answer that
Right.
question.
And
One is you got to
yeah.
take the questions where they come from, right?
Right.
So you don't get to say, hey, that's not a good question. People ask the questions that they want to ask.
Yes.
And one reason you could say people ask those types of questions is because how highly politicized our landscape is.
Absolutely.
We tend to think in political terms about every area of life, every instance of life, and we're in a very what do you want to call fully immersed political landscape that kind of like captures the imagination moment to moment in our daily lives, whether it be through all our feeds, news channels, conversations.
Walking down the street, seeing signs in people's yards.
And for the record, for those wishing, I wish we go back to the 80s or the 90s or whatever they have in their mind for when this discourse was a little bit more tamped down.
Yep.
It's not going to get better, at least not in the near future. It's going to get worse. And the reason it will get worse, as many people have pointed out, is that when you remove, when there's a decreasing influence of religion in any culture, what you will always see is that people who lose the transcendent, people who lose the eternal, will then turn up the significance of the political because it becomes immanentized. Everything that you do in this life matters of utmost importance because it's the only life you've got, right? So there must not just be justice, but there must be justice now on my terms in this way, so on and so forth. Right. So it's not going to get better. And that's another reason we got to think well about these things because this conversation is not going anywhere. And Christians have a lot that we can bring to the table for thinking clearly about it.
Well, you also might say, to your point, as Christians tend to ask these very kind of naive, basic questions: is Jesus a Republican or a Democrat? Because the church has abdicated its responsibility to talk about how Christ relates to all of life in the special civil society and our neighborhoods and even every area of life. In terms of implications. So the church has kind of abdicated a lot of that conversation over the years. Yeah. Now society has turned up, as you said, Doug, that it's something that can't be avoided, and therefore you have to think politically in terms of every square inch of your own society. You're either going to like it or not. And Christians now are on the reactive saying, oh, what do we do? Right. How do we think about this? Things look like they're not going the way that it should be going if it's actually good and wonderful and helpful and beautiful for all folks. Things seem to be detrimental. What do we think as Christians? And we're kind of a little bit behind because we've ignored the conversation for far too long, you might say.
Absolutely.
And it's like pastoral neglect to see all that happening and act as if our people are not wondering what to think, what to do. Right. We need, we pastor actual humans who have cell phones, who are looking and wondering what to do. And we want to biblically and right and and theologically, lovingly, and pastorally teach them how to rightly see politics through the gospel.
Yeah, and the back to the original question that you brought up, you still have. I still think you have a lot of different experiences of Christians in churches, depending on if you grew up in church. Sometimes that answer was just given socially, where, hey, if you're a Christian, you vote for this party. Or if you're this type of Christian in this type of church setting, then you vote for this party. Then obviously he's a Republican and Christians are Republicans. Or obviously he's a Democrat and therefore as Christians you need to vote Democrat. And there wasn't much critical engagement with how do we reach these particular conclusions.
Yes.
And so depending on maybe what church environment, how you answer that question might be different.
Yeah, right. So the church I grew up in was couple different Baptist churches. Every year around election time, they would pass out voting guides. Okay. And I know that wasn't unique to my church, right? You probably have seen similar things in your churches. Right?
I never.
Okay.
I had the Martin Luther King fan.
Oh, gotcha. So it was already decided. It was a foregone conclusion.
Correct.
But they would hand out voting guides. And they would do this because at the time, although I read recently this has been repealed, it used to be churches were not allowed to officially endorse specific candidates, or they would lose tax-exempt status. That's not the case anymore. But for better or for worse, it's just not the case anymore. And so what they would do instead—
And many didn't pay attention historically anyway to that.
A lot of people
promoting a lot of candidates.
Oh, yeah. The number of Democratic politicians who would speak in churches, in different churches across the country was exceedingly high. So it was kind of hypocritical anyway. But to the point, because they couldn't specifically endorse a candidate, they would put out these voting guides that would say, this candidate is for, and it would list a bunch of things, and this candidate is against, and it would list a bunch of things, and then it would say, the Bible says, and it would list a bunch of things. Right. And it was basically just asking people, do the math. This one says we were going to kill babies. This one says we're not going to kill babies. The Bible says don't kill anybody, including babies. So it was asking people just to read it and think. But and that might be better than other voting guides might have been just as simple as don't vote for this person because they're on the wrong team. I don't know, something like that.
Sure. Yep. I think that question also it can be asked sincerely, and it also can be asked insincerely and rhetorically. So if a Christian's like, I don't know how to vote, where does Jesus stand? Is he a Republican or a Democrat? I can understand a young Christian just saying, well, I got to figure it out. What does Jesus think? Others would say, well, Jesus is on our team. So it's not so much doing any kind of critical analysis of the Bible or of Christ. It's, well, is Jesus Republican or Democrat? Of course he's this, and so he's on our team, so you need to vote with us. So it's trying to kind of recruit Jesus to your kickball team.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, but so
which didn't always work. I mean, I always think about, when Joshua came to actually take the promised land, Jesus shows up, Old Testament, by the way.
I agree with you with that interpretation.
Right, yes, it's there. That's correct.
Angel of the Lord.
That's the right interpretation. Yeah. So he says, well, Joshua says, were you with us or against us? He says, no, that's not how it works. Actually, I'm on my own team. Right. And the better question is, are you with me?
Right.
Yes.
So it's, of course, that's a message paraphrase, you might say, but essentially that's what we
That's right. So just to circle back, since I said it was a dumb question, and then you guys have all gone on to show out why it's not really a dumb question.
I still think it's a dumb question.
Let me say why what I was reaching for when I said it was a dumb question. What I mean is Republican Party and Democratic Party didn't exist in first century Palestine. So asking whether or not Jesus was a Republican or Democrat in that sense is a silly question. That's like asking, was he an American or a Canadian? Well, those countries just didn't exist back then. But that's not what most people mean when they say that. To your point, they're normally saying, how then should we vote? Yeah. You remember that famous documentary that Francis Schaeffer put out, right? How then shall we live? Right. How then shall we vote is the question that they're asking. Yeah. Which of these two groups aligns more? And this is where some people—
Well, some of them, I mean, keep your thought, but also there's kind of the lacking good faith question as well, which can be a guise to— is Jesus going to allow me to stay where I'm at in terms of how I think about my life?
There it is.
Where I'm at politically, what I want to do, what I want to support. Also, the tribe that I'm with right now, is he going to allow me to stay with these people, or is there going to be a cost to following him?
Correct.
And might there actually be implications?
Yes.
So there's that kind of
that's
bad
exactly
faith
right.
question.
So, but whether it's a Christian leader or lay member of a congregation, exactly where I was going was there will be some who will take that passage from, it's Joshua 5, right? Where the angel of the Lord shows up and says, I'm not are you with us or against us? And he says, no. And they'll take that and say, I see. What we're really saying is Jesus just sort of hovers somewhere above the world, and you can vote for anybody that you want to as a Christian. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. He doesn't care.
And that's definitely not what you're saying.
Sure.
It's not what I'm saying. It's not what any Christian should say.
Well, didn't the Israelites, just to keep reading the story, didn't he actually go before them and actually eradicate those in the promised land?
He did.
Give it to God's people.
Right. So asking whether
I'm just laying that out there. Couldn't just be utterly arbitrarily neutral.
Correct.
Right, in terms of his stance.
So asking whether or not Jesus would align more with party A or party B is to get the question backwards. But if you don't ask the follow-up question, which is, yes, but does this political party A or political party B align more with Jesus, is a good question. It's a great question because what we're saying is, there are differences. There are real differences between party A, party B, party C, party D, and if you're in Europe, party H, right? There are significant differences.
Well, to your point, I think virtuous pastors are trying to lead their congregations well, leaders, or even Christians that are trying to think well about these things. The difficulty in this conversation is we tend to be extremely politically hijacked in the church, meaning we think in terms of this conversation in light of how society actually speaks about the issues, how it does its mathematics on how you put together what matters in terms of politics, what we can talk to, what we can't talk to, what's most important, what's not important. It's very difficult for the church to kind of disentangle a lot of the conversation in terms of the social ways of looking at things, cultural ways of looking at things, and then grab back presumption biblically and say, who is Christ? How does he lead us to understand politics? What does it look like to live before him? How has he structured the world? What does this mean for governing bodies? And then enter into the conversation on that basis where there's not as much baggage, if you will, from culture or even from people's lives, so that they can actually appropriate them with a lot more richness and biblical wisdom.
Yeah, they just have a small Jesus. Our Jesus transcends. So that's why they have to work in those weird categories to make it fit. And
well, it's not in contrast to what you're saying. It's just pastors have to do a great job of saying, "Hey, we're going to take this first. We're going to actually look at the totality of it in terms of its implications for who Christ is, what his world is, and how he structured the world, and then how politics relate in his world.
Absolutely.
And then we're going to discern." How do we think about the various options presented before us, the various political parties, even whether it be Democrats or Republicans? Then you actually are making right inference from the scriptures, not trying to make the scriptures fit to whatever particular political viewpoint you want to uphold at the time.
Right. That's important for pastors to know. Someone will educate your people about politics.
Right.
And if you don't, somebody's going to.
And they already have.
Right.
They already massively have. So that's what pastors have to realize. They already have a political social theory, whether you realize it or not, because they've been on their feeds. They've been watching news channels 24/7. They grew up in a political environment, and therefore all of that has shaped how they actually think about things and pushes on them. So those are presuppositions they bring to that particular discussion anyway.
Absolutely.
So even the question, is Jesus a Republican or a Democrat, is extremely loaded if you don't do a good job of bringing people along and getting them on a different foundation to think about it.
First of all, I just want to say how grateful we are to our listening and viewing audience. The responses we've gotten to the Grimké podcast have honestly been pretty overwhelming. To reach more folks, you know what you can do: like, subscribe, rate, comment, share. We certainly would appreciate it. Also, it might be that you have a topic suggestion and you'd love to hear us talk about something that's on your mind. You can go to grimké.org/topics. We would love to see those and potentially incorporate them into a future episode. Again, thanks so much for watching.
So back to your point, Doug. Right? Just in case people missed it, he's not a Democrat or Republican. Is that right? That'd be anachronistic fallacy a little bit.
And then I would say, but that doesn't mean that both of those parties are equally far from biblical vision of how reality should be. In other words, just because he's not Republican or not Democrat doesn't mean that at one time in history, one of these parties might not have been closer while still being far short of what a party should look like if Christians were trying to enact policies, laws, and so forth that were in line with biblical principles. Just because Jesus is not a registered member of the Republican Party does not mean that party might not be a good deal closer to what the Scriptures would have us do as Christians in society than the other party at this moment in time.
No question. Anybody who's listening to this conversation and then acting in bad faith and says, "There it is. See, it's settled." He's not Republican or Democrat. In fact, he couldn't have been, because that'd been anachronistically out of step. So therefore, we can do whatever we want to do as Christians. Is showing that they're extremely immature in how they understand who Christ is as Lord, what it looks like to live under his lordship, what it looks like to live in accordance with his word that speaks thickly to all these things, that leads us to right inferences in terms of how we think about political leaders, civil magistrates, and those who are actually more in line with the view of biblical justice that accords with upholding what he establishes for their responsibility. So anyone who says, "There it is, so we can't say," is just absolutely foolish. Absolutely foolish.
So if that's a deficient question and there's a better way to approach it, then we get into listening to the voices in Reformed evangelicalism. And there's certainly different ways of talking about politics. So how would y'all describe the different groups of people or views right now that are popular around how to speak to politics?
That's good.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's several kind of major camps. If you're looking at the way that Dutch Reformed Christians, and some of them would go back to the Reformers, the magisterial Reformers, have tended to speak about politics, they would say that that religion, the Scriptures, theology, has necessary implications for politics because of what politics is. Politics is the just ordering of society for the common good. That's just what it is. And that means that when a God who tells you, love your neighbor as yourself, that has one meaning at a personal level. I should treat my neighbor as I want to be treated. But then at the social level, for common good, it also means I should want a country to make it illegal for someone to murder another person, because that's not society where others are being treated as they want to be treated. It's not protecting individuals' right to life, their God-given dignities, image bearer, and so on and so forth. So if there were two candidates and one said, I think penalties for murder should be completely removed and basically we should decriminalize murder, and another says, on the contrary, murder is a big deal, it's very wrong, and we should continue to maintain the strictest penalties for this grievous offense. That's the one that a Christian should say, that's what the Bible teaches, so I'm inclined to go this way. It would be something deeply wrong with that person's thinking that would say, though Jesus isn't a Republican or a Democrat, so I can vote for the guy who says that murder's okay. No, you can't if you believe in the Ten Commandments, right? So the Dutch Calvinists would say that's how you should think about it. But then there's other camps.
Well, to your point, the has a long tradition of clarifying that the Scriptures, not just implicitly but explicitly, delineate the governing authorities, the civil magistrates, the rulers, the kings, that they are God's servant, and therefore they have a designated responsibility to promote the good and punish the evil. In accordance with what God has established is good and evil. And therefore, they have a particular authority they've invested as governing authorities to do that in society. Christians are to promote and support those civil magistrates that live in accordance with how God has established.
And that's all.
So that'd be your traditional Dutch
Reformers. That's from the Bible, right? So there's a book
from the Bible.
There's a book Founders Press just published this year. James Baird wrote. It's called King of Kings. I think the subtitle is something like A Reformed Christian View of the Government, and it makes a very simple argument, right? Number one, governments are God's servant to promote public good and punish public evil. That's Romans 13 and 1 Peter 2, 13, 14, literally straight from the Bible.
Right.
That's what the Bible says government exists to do. It exists to promote public good and deter or punish public evil.
Right.
The second step is a very important one. How do we know what is good? How do we know? Who says what is good? And if God is the one who says what is good, and he is, if you're a Christian, you believe that, then that means we should want governments who recognize what God says is good and seek to promote the one and deter the other in accordance with what God has said.
Sure.
That's the kind of government that we should want.
And then just to note, as an aside, even if this sounds radical, this is basic Christianity.
It's very basic.
Well, this is basic biblical
Very
Christianity.
basic, right.
So what we're not saying I prefer the historic Dutch Reform understanding in accordance of how they think about these things. They're just rightly discerning what is from the scriptures.
Yes.
Now there are other alternatives that float around that we need to talk about.
Yeah, there's some who
However,
separate.
we've kind of taken the bull by the horns and saying, well, this is the way we should go.
Well, that's true, but maybe it's worth mentioning the others, right?
Sure.
There are some who say theology and politics should never be combined because they're separate spheres, they're separate domains, and the Bible at most gives you, eternal truths, spiritual truths, and some principles, but
those things pertain to salvation.
Those mostly pertain to salvation. And whatever things would apply in the earthly sphere, it's a debate about how to best put them in and so on and so forth.
Right. Shouldn't talk about it.
And so you really shouldn't talk about them is what they're trying to say is you should never, I heard a man one time say his congregation should never know how a pastor might vote on the basis of his sermons. And I would say, that depends on what time and place you're living in.
Sure.
If I was living in the 1800s in England, they may not know whether I'm a Tory or a Whig. That's true. That's because they were having very specific debates about very specific things. But if I lived in Nazi Germany and they're running around and capturing millions of people and slaughtering them, and I've never once said it's wrong to kidnap and to kill people on the basis of their religion or their ethnicity, and they're over there like, I just don't know whether Pastor Doug would be a Nazi or not. I have failed. Same would be true for communist Russia, and the same would be true for good swaths of modern American politics. If my people listen to my sermons and they're like, I think he's okay with mutilating children's bodies in the name of transgenderism. I think he's okay with abortion. I think he's okay with gay marriage. I think he's okay with COVID policies that locked down nations and separated families and didn't line up with scientific data. I think he's okay with, you know what I'm saying? Like if they're just like listening to me and they're like, I don't really know who we'd vote for. I probably haven't been teaching the Bible very well in this time and in this place.
It's true. Well, at any time, in any place. Because I mean, these are universal truths in terms of how the scriptures lay out what is good for society, and therefore they accord with certain applications politically in the moment.
Absolutely.
But in terms of whether or not we should murder children in the womb, well, of course, that's unequivocal.
But how that is often talked about, usually it's under the umbrella of evangelism only. And so it's if you care about evangelism, you cannot speak to politics. And most Christians are like, I like evangelism. Like, I want to see people who don't know Jesus become a disciple of Jesus. Well, if I am for people coming to Christ, then I can't speak about politics. And so it's important. It isn't always said the way that you said it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's the pushback, the feel of things for people, not me, but outside is the Bible clearly states that it is stewardship.
Right.
The government's job is to steward or to serve. And when it gets weird is when the false accusation of people is say, well, you're saying then that your party saves. So the government is to serve, it's not the savior of people, but it is to serve God for his purposes. Yeah. And when they loop those together, now we're saying, you think the Republican Party is the Christian party and everything they say is right and biblical.
Yeah, I think it's a great point you're bringing up because a lot of that type of rhetoric very much is a tell of the expression of immature Christianity that kind of pervades a lot of the American church and especially the evangelical landscape. The whole notion that civil governments or governors or authorities save anybody.
Right.
is an absolutely insane notion.
It's asinine.
It's more of a tell that when a lot of Christians think about the substantive total of what it means to live as a Christian, it merely is about them no longer going to hell, believing in Jesus, they can forgive his sins. It's a pietistic understanding of the Christian faith, and therefore the only thing that pertains to what God is doing is them getting saved, i.e. having a new heart and ensured of an eternal destiny with Christ. And it doesn't pertain to how we live, what we do in our homes, how we think about education, what are civil authorities and what is their job and who do they serve and who actually has authority over those things. Mm-hmm. It utterly misses the lordship of Christ over every area of life.
Everything.
Yes, right.
At all.
So I think that there may be two, there are probably more, but I thought of two just now, contributing factors to why it is so common for a lot of evangelical pastors today to speak in the ways that we've been trying to critique. Mm-hmm. One of them is just a really bad, but very tragically common, especially in the modern world, misunderstanding of what law is and what it's good for, and what the gospel is and what it's good for. Right. So it used to be that everybody understood there were three uses of the law. The first and greatest use was it's a mirror that shows us where we fall short. The second use of the law was that it's a muzzle to restrain non-Christian people from wiling out, as we would say on the streets, from acting worse than they otherwise might work, right? And then the third, which was only for believers.
As we would say on the streets.
As we would say.
Okay, yes.
As Doug says on the streets.
Doug says on the street.
The third was as a kind of map, right? As a guide, something like that. And that was only for Christians. And there were classic debates in Christian theology about whether or not the third use really applied at all, whether the law had that use. You've got that Lutheran and that Calvin debate that's going on. Sure. And you've got that. What's wild today is the second use is the one that people are throwing out. They're like, I actually don't know that it's good that we pass a law that tells people that they can't commit abortion, because if we do that, right, then aren't they going to feel judged? Isn't that a hindrance to coming to the gospel? I'm saying that's actually not what politics is for. Right. Politics isn't for trying to save people, like you just said. That's not what it's for. It's about the just ordering of society. The government's job is to bear the sword, not the gospel. So its job is to say, hey, actually, you're not allowed to murder, whether you like it or not. Right now, I still care about that man's heart. I want him to go to heaven. I need to preach the gospel to him. Right. But it's still good in society if they say you're not allowed to murder babies. Well, that's good.
This is most evangelical pastors miss, that actually that also is in service of evangelism.
It can be.
Because the law is always in complementary service to the gospel, because whether the state is upholding what aspect of the law it is entrusted by God to enforce, it still acts as a mirror to show you, yes, you are condemned because you want to do evil things. And we are put in place by God to actually prohibit those things and punish those things when you do them. And the fact that you feel condemned because that muzzle has been placed on you by God's governing authorities is good, because you need the Savior. Mm-hmm. You're a lawbreaker, yes, civilly and in your heart, and therefore you need the one who redeems us from the wrath of the law and makes us new so that we don't want to break the law.
Right. I know. So it's like take a guy who's constantly stealing. Porch pirate, right? Stealing packages. Happens in my neighborhood all the time. And whenever it does, you'll see people. My neighborhood is full of the kind of people who went to the No Kings rally, the No Kings protest. Sure, full of that. Signs like that everywhere in my neighborhood. And whenever somebody
But they were the pro-thieves is what you're saying.
Hilariously. Okay. Whenever somebody steals a package and it's captured on the porch cam and somebody shares it to my neighborhood's Facebook page.
This is great.
Do you know what happens every time?
I do.
Every time. People jump in and they say, it's racist to share this photo because if the person who stole the package happened to be African American, you are perpetuating stereotypes about the Black community, and people are going to see this and misuse it. I'm just trying to show who took the package so I can try to capture this guy. Yeah. I'm not trying to make racial comments. I'm just literally trying to find the package, right? Or the other thing they'll do is they'll jump in and they'll say, we cannot judge this person because we do not know their life circumstances. And it may be that they needed this item more than you did.
Sure.
And also it could be that there are no good role models in their community and they just don't know that it's wrong to steal and yada, yada, yada.
It's environmental.
Buck wild really quickly. And what's insane
By the way, you're not making this up.
I'm not making any of this up.
This happens
almost every time.
This is what in many ways is becoming more of a normalized way of how we approach the issues of sin and crime and theft. is we no longer call evil evil.
Right.
Yep.
We call evil good, and then ultimately justify the committing of evil acts.
The most egregious example of this was maybe 3 years ago. A guy went around and stole pumpkins off of a bunch of people's porches and then put them on the porches of people who lived in the projects. I live about a quarter mile from 2 or 3 of the city's largest housing projects. And when after everybody was all in a tizzy about it, months later, he posted and said, by the way, I was the pumpkin thief. I'm a modern day Robin Hood, and this was wealth redistribution. I was taking pumpkin
redistribution.
from the rich.
Amazing.
I was giving them to
Thank
the
you for
poor.
blessing them with things that they can't even
Help me, Lord.
actually.
Bro, you were taking a pumpkin from a child. Like the thing, look how it was carved, right? I mean, I'm not very artistic, but I can still do a better carving job than my kids can. He's literally taking a kid's pumpkin and stealing it and putting it on somebody else's porch. And the point wasn't that they were just saying, well, who can know? People were celebrating this after he came out and said it because they were like, this actually makes sense.
This makes total sense.
So back to the point.
Right.
The point is, politically, this is all topsy-turvy. We should want a government to say, actually, stealing's wrong.
Stealing's
and
wrong.
The fact that you want to do it and you are celebrating it even, you think is a good thing, just shows how far you are from God.
And it also exposes hypocrisy when the government stands up and rightly enforces that which is evil. Because best believe if it actually came to his house and started stealing all of his goods and
he wouldn't be
redistributed
cool
them.
with it.
Oh, he would not be cool.
No,
You know
sir.
who you call? He would
I'm gonna
call
take
the
his
police
car.
in a moment.
I'm gonna take his car and go put it in the projects and
Yeah,
tell him
why
it's
don't we
wealth
redistribute all
redistribution.
of your goods?
Absolutely.
But through
It's
theft
insane.
and so it's a lot of it's just hypocrisy.
Okay, so we've got
they
a
just want to
fundamental-
remove the mirror, as you said, that points out, hey, hypocrite. Here's the other thing. When I was growing up, I stole pumpkins all the time, to be honest. We used to
smash
actually,
them?
I didn't redistribute them for the good of anybody
smashed
else. I smashed them for the good of myself.
Yeah.
And that's just what we did growing
Wasn't
up.
that a group?
Was it a crime? Yes. Was it a petty crime? Yes. Was it still sin? Yes. Was I condemned before God and before the law because of those things? Yes. And was that right? Yes.
Right.
Of course it was.
So we got a law gospel confusion. Here's the second factor that contributes to it. The times have changed significantly. I think it was Joe Rigney wrote an article for World Magazine that pointed this out with perfect clarity. It used to be in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even into the 90s, the two major political parties in America largely, not completely, but largely agreed on the same ends, the same goals.
Right.
They disagreed about the best way to accomplish those goals. So what that meant was, for example, Bible says we should take care of the poor. It says it like 2,000 something odd times.
That's right.
God is concerned for the poor. You had two parties in America that had significant numbers of Christians in them at the time. And there were different Christian faith traditions, and there wasn't the same level of polarization that we have now. So you had a lot of people in both parties who were genuine Christians. They both said, we care about the poor. What did they disagree about? They disagreed about the means. How do we best accomplish that?
Yeah.
One says, I think we need to expand welfare programs. That's going to be the best way to help the poor. The other says, I'm not sure that's working. We need to help them in some other way.
Right.
All right. Or even take abortion. In the 90s, whether they meant it or not is another question. But
Sure.
People like Bill Clinton said, we want abortion to be safe, which it never can be safe for the child, legal
That's correct.
and rare. Rare meaning we really don't want this to happen. In a perfect world, maybe there would never be abortion and we wouldn't need it, but they disagreed on the best way to reduce abortions. One said, let's try to do it through economic things and education and family programs and tax benefits. And the other group said, I think we need to make it illegal because it's killing and killing is illegal. So we need to make this illegal too. But they were agreeing that abortion should pretty much not exist. And they were disagreeing about how best to accomplish that. We don't live in that time anymore, right? We live in a time now where one party says, shout your abortion all the way up to full term.
Yep.
Remember when the governor of Virginia a number of years ago was caught saying that if a child was born alive after a botched abortion, it should be placed in the corner of the room while the doctor has a conversation with his patient about what we should do with it.
Correct.
By which he meant, how do we kill this thing
Yep.
even after he's been born alive?
This is old Roman pagan exposure.
It sure is.
Wow.
We have one party that says we want unlimited immigration without assimilation, and another party saying that is how you destroy nations and not a good idea. I mean, Bill Clinton was tough on immigration in the 90s, right? We have one party that says gay marriage, actually marriage for three people, marriage between a man and a child, whatever, however you want to define it, love is love. And the other party's saying, no, we got to have some limits somewhere. And let me just be clear. Republican limits are not nearly as close to the Bible as they should be.
Right.
Rampant divorce. There's still, some of them are increasingly cool with gay marriage. People all the time are asking me like, oh, you think Republicans are a Christian party, or you think Jesus would be Republican? I would say, honestly, bro, they're not nearly conservative enough. They're not nearly conservative enough.
Pastors will push back though and say, well, God's not, he's not pro-America. He's not concerned about saving nations.
God's pro every nation.
So well, that's correct. Yeah,
Acts 17, he literally determined the time and the boundaries of your habitation.
Yeah.
God is pro every nation. He wants every nation to look more like heaven on earth than it currently does. That is baked into the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Right. Yeah, the Great Commission assumes all authority under Christ. So Christ as Lord is an intrinsically political statement.
It is.
He is Lord over every authority, everywhere, all governing authorities. He's also the one who has established all the nations with their governing authorities so that they actually may be built up to fulfill the role that he's actually placed them in. Mm-hmm. So he's pro every nation, that they would also be discipled after his lordship so that all nations might be made disciples and come under Christ's kingdom. Of course.
But if you keep talking today in 2025, well, we all agree on the same goals. We just disagree on the means to get there. You're just living in la-la land. And you're going to confuse people, and you're going to actually increase the kind of corruption that harms others. I would just tell people, if you care about loving your neighbor, you can't not care about politics, because politics is a manifestation of neighbor love. It's not the totality of it. Sure. It's not even the most important part of it, but it is part of it.
So pastors that say, we should keep these things separate, or under the guise of evangelism, because it doesn't seem to actually be in service of evangelism. Mm-hmm. They say we should kind of two-step it. I want to talk about the things that are essential for salvation. What are there any other factors you might say that are actually driving why they actually refuse to engage at these things, with these levels?
I think confusion fuels cowardice.
Okay.
And then cowardice operates in confusion. I think they've got a base and a claim and a standing they want to uphold. Mm-hmm. And that's one factor. Another factor is I just don't think there's a lot of pastors have MDivs, and I don't know too many MDivs that are having this conversation to help us have a biblical politic to rightly understand, teach, and preach. And then the world has become increasingly tribal, and there's an increasing number of pastors that we've always had, which was personality-driven pastors, that are trying to brand themselves. And to brand yourself rightly, to get the most likes and follows, you gotta tippy-toe around offending any political party. Right. And then secondarily, if you're smart enough, like I know enough the evangelical conservatives that are smart enough, or not conservatives, just evangelicals that are smart enough. Sure. They know how to double speak. Yep. They know how to pull on tickle the fancy of one side and then tickle the fancy of the other side, contradicting themselves, hypocritically talking the whole time. And then it's so confusing, but so sophisticated in its confusion that the people think he's for both of them, and he's taken no position, and he hasn't moved the envelope. And at the end of that conversation, Jesus is not Lord. Yeah, he's made himself Lord through his writings, teachings, and talking.
Yeah, I think a lot of pastors, for better or worse, especially the savvy ones, are very much not worried about biblical fidelity, but their public relations. Mm-hmm. They're much more like PR pastors.
Yes, sir.
They're constantly taking little demographic samples, little surveys, testing various sample groups in their congregations, and therefore they get the feedback, and therefore, like politicians, they're walking a very thin line in their congregations to appease the masses, which is the whole wrong orientation for actual pastors that are called to biblical fidelity and to expound the lordship of Christ over every area of life, and therefore let him be actually the Lord over all things.
And they haven't read the Bible. I mean, Stephen could have preached a hypocritical, wishy-washy sermon and been alive a little longer.
That's right.
Jesus, our King, preached the truth of the word, and it still got him killed. I don't understand what Bible we're reading where you're preaching to appease two political parties so that you can have power, because power has been wrongly asserted to yourself and not to the lost people of this world that need to know Jesus is Lord. Right. And so we'll continue to try to make ourselves Lord. We'll continue to try to make our branding more important than lost souls who need to hear as Sinclair Ferguson says, the confession Jesus is Lord is the earliest Christian creed and the boldest political statement. Right. Jesus is Lord. That's the influx, the power of our statement. Bow to him, submit to him, worship him. He's the only one worthy. But if we continue to try to make room for everybody, you know who gets pushed out of the room? Jesus.
Right. Yeah. Well, to your comment earlier too, I think a lot of pastors, once you get into a market-driven approach to discipleship in your church, and you're constantly trying to test the congregation to see what's politically acceptable for you to actually teach them from the scriptures, then you're already on a bad footing. Right. But it also leads you to be very mindful that you might be called certain names that you don't like. Mm-hmm. Like this is I want back to your example is all of a sudden you were called a racist. Well, and if you, one of the, Dr. Ellis, who teaches with us, he always mentions, well, that objection goes away when you go to the United Kingdom in a lot of ways.
That's exactly what that is.
Because actually it's a differentiation of the types of people in certain areas and cultures that are actually promote thievery and those who do not. It has nothing to do with actually your complexion. Mm-hmm. And so that accusation just doesn't stick. Whereas stateside, it's just another name, the label that people bring up to try to dismiss the truth of what's actually being said. And pastors have to have a little bit thicker biblical skin to actually realize, those are just not true.
Right.
Like, of course you're going to, of course I'm going to be slandered. Of course you're going to call me names, but in reality, that's just not the case.
Yeah. I think the cowardice piece that you were talking about, which touches on exactly what you were saying here, is huge. I just don't think we can overestimate. If you've got a man who knows that 25% of his congregation is more liberal than the Bible, and he teaches anything in such a way that would expose that with clear implications for political stuff. So he's not preaching politics, right? He's preaching the Bible, and the Bible has implications for politics. But he won't even do that because he knows that if he does that, he will upset, alienate, possibly lose 25% of his church. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of people. Yeah. That's a lot of clout. It's gone. And you can always tell when it's that kind of man because normally he's at a very large church. It's normally fairly conservative in its theology, and he's never shy about doing it this way. He's always shy about doing it that way. Yep. He'll take shots at the right because he knows he's not going to lose these people because he preaches enough theology for them to know he's a conservative guy. But when it comes to things on the left, it's always tolerance. There's always qualification. Yep. There's always, we have to remember the intent of the heart. So there's all these excuses for why, it's okay. But then over here, it's, obviously, that's way out of bounds, right? That's way out of bounds, and but it is cowardice in the heart.
And even that way of trying to basically quantify how pastors preaching is still socially captive at that point.
Yes.
So the scriptures work much more up and down, or north south.
That's right.
Not just left right. We're saying, I can punch to the right, but I coddle constantly to the left. The scriptures are not concerned about this group socially over here and this group over here socially. It's true north, as many theologians would say, and therefore you proclaim those things, and it just so happens to correct whatever side people are socially, and it just doesn't have regard for those things.
It's an idol exposer. It's punching. The gospel punches the idols of both parties in the face. And then it creates a biblical reality of understanding the gospel and understanding politics. But if we talk about cowardice, which I jumped off, I'll add one more. And I'm sorry I cut you off.
You're great.
Is cultural. People preach from a cultural background. Some preach for cowardice because they're doing a market they're measuring the markets on how much it's going to work. They're cowardice because they're measuring their congregation on if they're going to lose people, lose money, and lose status. And then I think there's a cultural element, which I grew up in Paterson, New Jersey, hood community, Black community, and from as long as I can remember, I think I was, I'm joking here, but I was born a Democrat. Mm-hmm. I think I had a Democrat birth certificate. I was born a Democrat. I was Democrat. And why was I Democrat? Because I was told.
Did you have to specify your political party you were born? You don't even have to specify your gender now. It's amazing.
Yeah, he didn't have to specify gender, but he had to specify political party.
You had to specify a political party.
But I grew up in the hood. The Republicans, they were evil, they were racist, and I couldn't be a Republican. I couldn't even discuss Republicanism because it was evil. And if you were a Republican, you were an Uncle Tom, a sellout. You were a coon, and all of that stuff was real. That was that was reality for me. Like, I had to be Democrat. All those other people were evil. The Republicans were the devil. And that came out in preaching.
Just to comment on what you're saying, a lot of those accusations are not just in the past.
Right.
Those are current realities as well for men that want to stand on the scriptures, especially men like yourself, that'll be called those things today.
I still get them.
But faithful pastors have to stand with Christ and not worry about the slander of those who profess Christ, even claim to be Christians, or those who don't claim to be Christians. They have to know who they are, rested. And it takes a lot of courage to be a man like yourself even saying those things in the face of those current accusations that come even today.
Yeah, they've come. Yeah, and that bled into the church.
Things. Yeah,
absolutely. And that bled into the church. So the preaching became, that's where we get the Black Jesus from. Because we had to make his politic, we went further than his politic. We went to his color. He would be the liberator. And then as I began to question, I went to North Carolina A&T as a political science major following Jesse Jackson and Jesse Jackson Jr. to be that, to understand, to guide that. And I had a crazy conservative professor who told me that I wasn't a Democrat. I was a Republican. I just didn't know it.
I can see him saying that.
I think too, like in this some may even do this from a place of ignorance, where they are thinking like, some of these things are complex, or to take what you said, punches errors of both parties in the face. Right. It does. But that doesn't mean that all political parties on the planet have the same number of errors. That's right. Or that those errors are equally weighted in the scriptures, or that they're equally destructive for societies. So is Jesus tribal in the way that some people think he is? The answer is unequivocally no. That's where we started today. So every Christian on the planet, in any country they live in, should not assume that Jesus is wearing the colors of whatever party they happen to think is best. That, on the other hand, that party might be a lot closer to what Christians ought to be, even while at the same time, that's not the same thing as saying it's beyond critique or that it's above reproach or anything of that nature. But there is a kind of ignorance that says, Democrats care about the poor and Republicans care about whatever gay marriage, and I'm a Christian, I care about both, so what am I supposed to do? And I'm saying, well, that would be an ignorant way of thinking about these things, because it isn't that Republican Party doesn't care about the poor. It's that they have a different strategy for how the poor are best cared for, and that's a different kind of discussion than should gay marriage be legal? Should polyamory be legal? Should men be allowed in women's restrooms, right? See what I'm saying? It's back to the means and ends discussion all over again. But there's some guys who are just ignorant of this. And so they're just like, man, I'm looking at these things and it seems like they both make a lot of mistakes. And so I guess at the end of the day, it's a coin toss. Well, it's not a coin toss if your whole Bible's open, if you know that Jesus is Lord and you're allowing his word to speak to everything and you're not confused about the difference between means and ends. It's not a coin toss.
Yeah. And a lot of times false humility. So pastors that say those types of things, you have to assume the position of omniscience in order to say these things are too complex for you to understand.
That's right.
which essentially you're saying, I know how complex they are. Simple folks like yourselves can't really put all the pieces together, nor should we expect that you simpleton Christians can think politically in accordance with the Bible. So I'm going to withhold all of that brilliance from you because only I can understand it. And therefore you can just actually vote however you want, live how you want, pick whatever side you want.
Yeah.
It sounds very pious, but it's actually grossly arrogant.
But I think it's also important. It's important for especially younger pastors, maybe even older pastors, to realize there will always be an issue over which Christ is Lord, because he is Lord over every issue, for which you must speak to faithfully serve your congregation, which will cost you something.
Right.
And it might not always be politics. And so there might be the temptation of a younger pastor to say, well, I'm not going to talk about it. It's going to go away in 3 or 4 years. And then I'll be able to talk. But there will always be an issue. There always have been issues. You know, it's what do we think about Vietnam War? What do we think about the secession of the southern states? Right. What do we think about colonial colonists being able to rebel against Britain? What do we think about killing King Charles and starting the Long Parliament? What do we think about leaving the Roman Catholic Church and starting this Reformation? Like there is always a issue which people in your church are polarized on, and to be a faithful pastor of disciples of Jesus, you must shepherd them through it. You will have to speak. Some will agree, some won't. Some will pat you on the back. Some will walk out the door. But that's just being a pastor.
But to your point, this is back to, again, we have to restate. We're at a season of restating what it means for Christ to be Lord, what the basic teachings of the Bible are, that we're fallen, sinful human beings, that we distort all of God's reality in His created order and do not love our neighbors as we should, and we mess a lot of things up. To your point, that's what pastors do. Right. We apply the good news of Jesus that He says, repent of those things, this thing, that thing right there, and actually bring it under the lordship of Christ and live in accordance with Him. Of course, that's going to vary over time, but what's not going to change is that's always the task, because God is transforming our people and reconforming them to the image of His Son.
Absolutely.
And therefore, if that's how you approach pastoring, well, then we would say, well, you're not a pastor then, because that's what pastors do.
As we're talking, I was thinking about people I've heard, very high-profile Christians I've heard, who have used passages of the Bible to try to justify some of the errors that we've been critiquing. This sort of Jesus who just floats above everything, and therefore, you know, one of them is they'll sometimes go to passages in the New Testament where people demanded that Jesus settle a dispute that had clear parties, and on the surface, it seems like He refuses to do that. Sometimes those guys just need to keep reading because context makes it clear that ain't really what's happening.
Of course.
But the other thing they need to do is remember there's more passages in the Bible than just those.
That's right.
A lot more, right? So take the political parties. They were religio political parties of the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
That's correct.
Think about that. Now, is Jesus a Pharisee? No. Is He a Sadducee? No. Was one of those two groups a little closer to what He was actually? Yes. The Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. They did not accept any of the books other than the first 5 books of Moses. Jesus quoted from all those other books, and He did it to Sadducees. So there would be people who would say, well, we should never choose sides because we might alienate the Sadducees among us and they won't become Christians. That's not how that works. Jesus spoke the truth, and then He was like, hey, by the way, Pharisees, your heart is way off. And if you don't listen to what I'm saying, you're going to hell as an unjustified man.
Well, to your point as well, Paul, as it basically gets arrested, he's on the way to Rome. He intentionally picks a political fight.
He sure did.
I'm on trial for the resurrection of the dead.
In order to provoke the conversation of who is Christ. I'm on trial because essentially I'm in line with these guys.
So Pharisees,
amen.
Pharisees
are like, we like that
Pharisees,
guy.
We like it. He's with us now. Pretty far short.
We don't believe Christ is
Lord,
Lord,
Pharisees are pretty far short of Jesus, and yet the Sadducees were even worse. That's all I'm saying. It's just this simple. Or even take Paul in Acts 17, right? So if you know anything about Greek philosophy, you know there were 2 competing philosophies in the ancient world. There was Epicureanism, there's Stoicism. I won't go into the details of what they were, but the point is, how does Christianity relate to them both? And what's interesting, I've read a tremendous amount of both those philosophies and academic articles that were talking about this. What is interesting about this is Paul doesn't just say they're both equally wrong. Jesus is the way. Now, that's how we would talk today. That's not what Paul does. Paul starts with the Bible. He lays out all the truths, but he's not a fool. He knows that the Stoics were closer to the truth about many things while still being very wrong and still far short of where they ought to be.
Right.
But when you get to the end of Acts 17 and it says some said he's out of his mind and some said, we'll hear you more about this, it's probably the Epicureans who said, that joker is out of his flipping mind. He's way out there, right? And the Stoics are like, I don't know about that, but I will hear a little more. And then God saved some of both, right? Praise God for that.
Praise God.
My point is, if you're over here in 2020, 25, and you're saying, I said 2020, 25, I don't even know what year that would be. How about just 2020?
It's just that preacher rhetoric.
You're our Lord, 2025. And you're saying, yeah, but neither of these are fully Christian. I would say absolutely, yes and amen. Which one of them is a little closer? Just a little closer to what it ought to be. And that's all we're saying. Does that make it all right? No. Does that mean you have to vote for every one of the candidates that runs for that party? No. Does that mean that party is always going to be a little closer? Also, no. It just means it's honestly kind of simple. Go back to the Bible, see what God says, and then say, all right, let's measure it. Who's a little closer on this one?
Well, to complement your point, this also, Christians have to avoid this kind of utopic idealism when it comes to civil leaders. Mm-hmm. There is not a king in all the scriptures. There's not a civil leader in all of history that is Jesus.
Right.
That's true.
Okay. Christ is Lord over all those civil leaders.
Yes.
And they're all called in all of their shortcomings and all of their strengths to align themselves to the greatest degree with who he is. Amen. And so Christians have to actually promote the ones that are closest in accordance with those things. There's no such thing as I'm going to pick the perfect political leader, and he's not going to have any flaws, and therefore I just don't like, so I can't vote for anybody who has shortcomings and who's not Christ. Well, that's just not how God's world works.
No.
Yeah. Christ has established fallen, sinful human beings to be civil leaders that are actually called to be his deacons to uphold what he says is true.
To your point about the idealism, back in 2016, I remember a member of our congregation saying, it's tough because they're like, a lot of Trump's policies seem to be closer to the Bible. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But Trump is a person, right? He's been married 3 times, allegedly had an affair with a porn star. He's crass.
Did you say, well, don't marry him then?
Crass with his mouth. I didn't. Crass mouth. And
but that would differentiate the space,
demeaning toward certain people and people groups.
Yeah, so we don't need to repeat all that.
More, this is him as a person, right? And then I'm not going to repeat any of them. I'm just saying they're saying all that. They're like Hillary Clinton's policies just don't seem to line up with the Bible. But as a person, she forgave her husband for an affair. Seems like a good person. And I was like, hey, actually, look, not justifying anything that Trump has done as a person that you've just correctly identified. Your definition of what it means to be a good person has to include the fact that Hillary Clinton is okay with babies being murdered. That's not the definition of a good person in my book. Is that the definition of a good person in your book? They're like, no, actually. I was like, okay, so really then we're talking about 2 immoral people. Right. 2 immoral people who fall pretty far short of Jesus, as you said. But you just told me that one of their policies is a lot better than the other policies. So you don't have to vote for either one of them if your conscience won't let you. You don't have to. Sure. You really don't. I was like, but if you just told me one of these sets of policies is a lot closer to the Bible than the other, but it felt like this was a good person, that was an immoral person, actually, you just need a bigger, fuller, even on that point, better Bible definition of what constitutes being a good person.
That's right.
And do all this with the recognition that nobody's ever going to be Jesus.
Well, not to get too far afield, a lot of this is more of a deeper weakness in the evangelical landscape, is we equate fidelity in life towards Christ with well-intendedness. Mm-hmm. Oh, that person's a sweet person. They really want to live for Christ. Now, I know that most of their life as a Christian has been a wreck because they haven't obeyed him in a lot of areas, but they're really trying hard.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that type of sentimentality has to be eradicated in all areas of the Christian life, much less in terms of how we think about political civil leaders and what their role responsibility is. So that has a certain content in terms of responsibilities, which is distinct for that particular role. And either someone's fit in accordance with the responsibilities of the role or they're not. And so that has to weigh into how we think about who's actually fit for office.
That's good.
What you were doing was a reorientation. That's what we need. We need a reorientation of this. So often we're putting Band-Aids on bullet holes when it comes to the idolatrous political partisan thinking that's wrong, that puts Jesus, that where our politics shape our theology and not our theology shaping
politics.
Shaping the politics.
Right.
So therefore but everybody comes in with a quick pithy statement on how to fix it with catchphrases and well, you have to do this and not do. No, we need a reorientation of the discipleship, the crooked, broken discipleship that has created this quagmire of a mess across the landscape of evangelicalism. And we need to rightly assert what God says about politics through his Bible. And I think each seminary needs to have a class. And I think each church needs to teach that as a part of just standard kindergarten discipleship, because without that, we're just going to keep getting these punchy little cute things that don't cover Jesus as Lord. It just inserts him in a cute, non-comprehensive, reigning way.
Yeah, bumper sticker Christianity can't produce a society full of good drivers.
Amen.
In fact, anytime I do see a bumper sticker car, and there's several of them in our city, overrun with bumper stickers, the first thing I realize very quickly is this is someone I need to avoid like the plague, because they're extremely ill thought through in every area of life.
And it's worse than just the one student driver.
It's way worse than, it's far worse. So to your point, Prez, we need something a little bit thicker in terms of how we think about what it means to be Christians, what it means to live for Christ, and engage in all areas of life, especially politics.
And I think it's a good summary of kind of where we've been, and maybe a good place to end, because we started with, is Jesus Republican or Democrat, which is taking political categories and trying to figure out how do we make Jesus fit into that.
Yeah.
And as the conversation moved, we kept saying over and over again, which is true from the scriptures, that Christ is Lord.
That's right.
And if Christ is Lord, now how do I think about politics, which is a complete reshaping of where it is, which I think is very, very needed. And I know a lot of pastors who are doing the hard work of trying to reorient. Maybe they've recognized I'm off on that. I am not as prepared as I'd like to be to pastor my people. So I'm reading, I'm talking to the pastors, I'm in the scriptures, I'm praying, I'm thinking through these things. So certainly politics is not going to go away. We're grateful that Christ is Lord.
That's right.
So
hopefully this is helpful.
Yeah. Thanks for the conversation, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.